Hey Curator, how did East Hampton get its name?
Welcome back to Ask the Curator. Got some really good questions from some of our local students in East Hampton, and they rely on trying to figure out why Sag Harbor is called Sag Harbor and why East Hampton is called East Hampton. And you'd think this would be the easiest question in the world to answer. But they're a little problematic, and that's because I think people became more interested in why things were named during the late Victorian period, the 1880s. So they were very imaginative, and some of the things, like some of the road names, people have made up some really crazy things. There's a Pantico Road in the village, and the Victorians thought it meant pant I go because the hill was so tall that people would pant by the time they got up to the top. In reality, it's a Native American word, and we'll talk a little more about Native American words as we get into this. But let's start with East Hampton. So it's pretty easy if you look at Southampton, that was founded in or settled by white English people. In 1640, they called it Southampton. There are questions even about why it's called Southampton, but we'll not get into that today. So if Southampton is Southampton, and if we are east of Southampton, why not be East Hampton, right? And if you're west of Southampton, why not be West Hampton? So that's simple. But what does Hampton mean? And that's where we really get into an interesting story of old languages from England. So we know what East means. So we're looking at Hampton. So its English origin is what you'd expect. The good majority of the English immigrants were obviously from England, and a whole lot of them came from an area called Kent. So, but that's easy, sort of. But the other thing is that we weren't originally called East Hampton. We were originally called Maidstone. And Maidstone is probably significant because people coming from another area might think that they're honoring where they came from by naming the community after Maidstone, which is a good-sized community in England, in Kent, in fact. Or it might be a way of saying that, you know, we used to go to Maidstone, and the area around here, the flat pastures, look a lot like Maidstone. So that may be the reason they called it Maidstone. Or another reason might be that people think that Lyon Gardner, who settled in 1639 out here, that he was from Maidstone. So, you know, lots of interesting theories. But after a year, we aren't Maidstone any longer. We're East Hampton. So if we look at Hampton, we wonder, what does Hampton mean? Well, ham, H-A-M, is Anglo-Saxon English for home or meadow or pasture. Hampt, with a P on the end of it, is truly an Old English word for pasture. Ton, T-O-N, is Old English for town or settlement or village. So you put east, hamp, ton, and you have the East Pasture Town. And one of the most important reasons for the settlement of the east end of Long Island was that the Native Americans had cleared almost all of the forest, and we were all pasture land, and the majority of our white settlers from England had traditions of coming from farms that were cattle farms. So, not too hard. So let's look at Sag Harbor. So Sag Harbor is interesting because one thing that you have to remember is that the waterway was the highway. So therefore, people tended to settle along the shores, along the coastline, particularly where there were harbors. Well, when Southampton was settled in 1640, there's no harbor where Southampton is. There's a beach. So their harbor was north of the village. Same thing here with Sagaponack, an early settlement from about 1653. Sagaponack is on a beach. So you go straight up to the North Shore, and where do you come to? You come to what we call Sag Harbor, because Sag Harbor was the harbor for Sagaponack. And it wasn't until later that Sag Harbor gets settled in the early 18th century, and it develops into this great port, by about the time of the Revolution for whaling. So we've got Sag Harbor. But where does sag come from? Sag is a Native American word. We're told that it's derived from a tuberous marsh plant that produces a round, starchy, potato-sized ball at the end of its root, and that the native people, boiled and baked that, and therefore it's sort of like a potato. The colonists noticed that after storms, the root ball would often surface and float up on the marshland, and it was very popular for ducks. So the colonists called the sag plant duck potato, because ducks would eat these little potatoes. So the plant is called sag. So in the Native American regional dialect, Sagaponack translates to land of the big ground nuts, because ground nut was the term that people used for potatoes or any other root vegetable. And of course, root vegetables were very popular during colonial times because you could harvest them in the fall, store them in your sandy basement in the winter, and they'd last all winter long. So there you've got the story of two names, but you wouldn't really think it would take quite so long to figure out why something is called Sag Harbor or East Hampton. So please tune in for our next question and send us some more questions. We've got some in the hamper now, but we'd like some more. And don't forget to contact Marianne at info@easthamptonhistory.org, and we'll see you in a while.